Hi, Brooke.
Hi.
Sorry about that. I didn't think it was set up like that. I was just coming to join, and then I realized it needed the host, so I had to find the login. And so I'll just have to give a bit of time now for people who've tried to follow the link and found that it wasn't.
Yeah, no problem. I'll work on trying to share my screen.
Yeah, people are jumping in now. I'll change the settings on this evening's call to make sure that you can start it, because I won't be able to join. But it should all be straightforward.
Great. And it starts recording and all of that stuff automatically, right?
Yeah, it's all set up to just go.
Great.
Okay, can I just say a few words, Brooke, and then I'll hand over to you to get started, if that's all right?
Yes, please.
Start my video, not that we need it. So hi everyone, thanks for joining. This is our fourth or fifth webinar for Youth for Our Planet Mobilizers. And as you hopefully know, we're responding to what we're hearing from the network that you think will be most valuable. And I think this is a really important one that Brooke's put together for today, which is about being able to manage yourself, really, as we're taking action, making sure you look after yourself, don't burn out, and consider how other people can be supported to do the same. So we've got a packed webinar schedule over the next couple of weeks, so do keep an eye out for the other ones. I think there's 3 next week, and this one will be repeated later today at 7 o'clock UK time. And the recording will, as always, be available on youthforourplanet.com next week. The webinar program's still up and running, so please do let us know if there's anything that you want to be covered that isn't currently scheduled, hasn't been covered already, but also especially think about any organizations or individuals or trainings that you know are out there that you would really like to do, but normally there's a cost or it's not at a good time for you, and let us know, and we can see if we can program that so that it's convenient for you. We just want to make sure that you have access to everything you think you need to be able to take action this year and beyond. So without further ado, I'll pass straight over to you, Brooke, and disappear myself.
Great. Thank you so much, Matt. And hi, everyone. Thank you for being here today for this lesson or session, as we'll call it. And we're here because the work we're all doing is hard work. And it can be mentally, emotionally, and physically really draining. And so what I would love to do today is both share and discuss some ways that we can recharge, bounce back, and create, as much as we can, a better balance in our lives so we can continue to bring our best self to the cause every day. Because it is important work to us, we care about it, but it also can be really hard and draining work. So a bit about myself before we move forward. My work is I train conservationists and environmentalists on how to design communication plans that motivate action. I gave a previous webinar that you may have seen for Youth for Our Planet called, I think it's called Designing Behavior Change. It might be Motivating Behavior Change, but it is in the archive section of your website if you want to check that out. Now, my career, I spent the last 13 years, and I'm still in the conservation space. Prior to that, I spent a decade working in the corporate world in commercial advertising. So I'm not an expert per se on these topics of energy management, recharging, resilience, but I've spent a lot of time working on these things specifically for myself, and I've given a lot of advice to my friends on this topic, as I've had so many different roles over my career, and each of those roles and organizations and companies had this unique set of challenges and needs. And I've also seen for myself how, as I've gotten older, my own needs have changed. So I really want to share with you today some of the things I've been studying, I've learned along the way, that I've applied to myself to kind of start this conversation and start this thought process on what you can apply for yourself. And I think Matt really described it very well in how do we take care of ourselves? So this is really about self-care. I have some practices to share. I do hope that you have the chat box open, because throughout the lesson, I'll be asking for your inputs on some things you've tried, things that have worked for you, so that we can build upon what I'm starting as the conversation here. So what we'll cover today, again, the goal, get a better understanding of our engagement styles and our energy sources, and also the things that take energy away from us. We'll start with more of a zoomed in approach. So looking at the day-to-day, how does our energy get spent and used? How can we recharge? And then we'll zoom out a little bit, looking at our energy when facing things like adversity, negativity, setbacks, and even zooming out even more on building healthy practices for the long haul. So really thinking about the long road ahead and how can we make sure we have balance and healthy practices so we can sustain our energy. So we'll jump in on the day-to-day. Again, this is the zoomed in approach. How do we manage our energy in the day-to-day? So there is a spectrum of one personality trait that I'll describe in a bit more detail on each of our individuals' tendency to seek the company of others and talk. And this is a spectrum. So on one far end of the spectrum, you may be more solitary and more reserved in this aspect of your tendency to seek the company of others and talk. You may be on the opposite end of the spectrum, which is you're more outgoing and energetic. And there's no right or wrong, there's no better or worse, but if you could, in the chat box, share with me, where do you think you sit on this spectrum? How would you describe yourself? Are you all the way solitary, reserved, all the way outgoing, energetic, or leaning one way or another? It's sort of a really wide spectrum. So however you want to describe it. But please share with me in the chat box where you feel you sit on this spectrum for this trait. And if you are struggling to access the chat box, I believe you can press Alt-H, the letter H, and that will bring up your chat box. So if you're comfortable sharing where you sit on this, please do. Okay, so we have someone saying outgoing, energetic, somewhere in the middle, right? So these are definitely the extremes, so you can be anywhere in the middle. Thank you, Francis. I'll share, as others may be typing in now, I'll share for myself, I lean more to the solitary reserve side. Probably not in the middle, but I'm definitely in maybe that far left quarter of this spectrum. Right, so at any moment, please do, I'm going to move forward, but please do add in the chat box. Outgoing and for Youth for Our Planet, I'm assuming that's Matt. Generate ideas through talking and bouncing around ideas with others. Great, and we will touch on that in a few slides from now. So this spectrum, the term for this personality trait is actually extroversion. And this comes from something called the Big Five personality traits. It's a model. FFM stands for the 5-factor model. This is a model that is most widely accepted and valued by most psychologists in the world. they feel is the most accurate categorization of personality traits. So the big 5 are listed at the bottom. They're big umbrella ones, lots of nuances in between those and below those. But the one I'm really focusing on today is our levels of extroversion. And actually, if you go online and look for the big 5 personality traits, there are tests you can take online that help you identify more specifically where you may sit on this spectrum. So one of the reasons why I like this as opposed to some other models is you may have heard the terms before, introvert and extrovert. And those can really box us in to being one way or another. And what I like about this is that it is a sliding scale. So it's not, I'm only an introvert, or I'm only an extrovert. In addition, there can be some negative connotations or inaccurate assumptions of what it means to be an introvert or an extrovert. So I'd rather get rid of those boxes and those sort of binary terms and think about a level of extroversion. And Ibrahim added outgoing end as well. Great. So I want to talk about how this relates to energy. So, what does it matter that we might be on the more solitary, reserved end of extroversion or outgoing, energetic end? And it really comes down to how our energy moves throughout the day. So I might be in the minority here in terms of being on the solitary reserve side on this webinar, and that's fine. And I'll share some of my own experiences here. But if you're on the left side, that solitary reserve side, you can think about your energy as you wake up in the morning with a full glass of water. And as you interact with others, that glass gets emptied bit by bit. So each interaction is taking some or a lot of water out of that glass. So depending on how many interactions you had in a day, you may end your day with just a little bit of water left or no water left, a completely empty glass. Now on the other end of that, and this may apply to more of you, is you wake up in the morning with an empty glass. And as you interact with others, a little or a lot of water is getting added to that glass. So if you've had a very full day of interactions, you'll end your day with a very full glass. If you haven't had so many interactions, if you've had to do a lot of solitary work, your glass may still feel kind of empty, and you may feel a little bit unfulfilled for that reason. So again, there's not a right or wrong, and we're looking at extremes here in the examples I'm giving. The intention is to have a better sense of awareness of what's happening for ourselves in a day. This is an analogy someone gave me a few years ago, and I found it so helpful, especially as feeling like I was an introvert and in a box. It helped me really understand what that means in terms of what's happening day to day in my interactions, in the time I spend, and how that relates to my energy. So continuing on this also affects some of our preferred ways of working. And this has already come up in the chat box, which is great. So if you are in the outgoing side, you may like to just take action, jump in. Let's start talking about this with friends and making decisions and thinking about how to move things forward and essentially processing more externally. And it's helpful to have other people to do that with, so you're not just talking to yourself. And you may enjoy roles where you're speaking and receiving a bit more attention, and may lean towards then communicating externally or public speaking as roles that you really enjoy doing in your work. Now on the reserved end, these are folks who may take a little bit more time to process, reflect, observe, even absorb information before feeling ready to contribute, to collaborate, to make a decision. And that often means there's time needed to work autonomously or in smaller groups, like one-on-one and not larger groups. The reserved tend to like roles where they're listening more than speaking, or doing activities like writing, planning, and designing, more so than public speaking. This is a small list. If you did decide to take the Big 5 personality test online, it would give you much more details about your preferred way of working, especially if you are more in the middle and not on the extreme ends of this spectrum. However, even this basic list starts to give us a sense of how we prefer to work, and it may help us understand why we've chosen some of the roles that we've chosen. In addition, it helps us understand our team members and our colleagues. Not everyone has the same preference for how they work. And this gives us some cues as to, oh, my team member may really need to go off and work on this on their own before making a decision. So I'm going to find the others who want to process this externally with me. And then let's all come back together at some time. So you can really set up a structure and a system that brings out the best of everyone. So with these energy sources and with our preferred ways of working, there's some roles, especially in our climate action work, that's square in our comfort zone. We love doing them. They're natural for us. They feel good. And actually, if we can take another moment in the chat box, which of the roles that I've listed here, and they can be beyond the list, again, this is sort of a basic list, what roles do you find are in your comfort zone? They meet your preferred ways of working. And I'll give everyone a minute to chime in the chat box for that. So speaking is one. That's right in your comfort zone, as more on the outgoing side. Networking. Great. We're going to talk about networking today as well. The creative side. Networking as well. Training. Social media. Cool. Is it possible to have both traits? Yes, Francis, great question. And actually, I meant to mention this in the previous slide, is that in that spectrum, you can be somewhere right in the middle. It also can change depending on the situation you're in. So if you're in a very, very comfortable situation, you might find that more of your outgoing side is coming out. If you're in a new situation, you may feel a little more reserved and solitary. What the personality trait will try to measure is your natural disposition, basically how we're built from the get-go. But there's always room for us to, even as we get older, to start to shift along that spectrum a bit. So that's a great question. You can totally have both traits. I think personally, I'm someone who, although I lean more solitary, really enjoy public speaking, which that would often put me on the other end of the spectrum. So great. So we have some roles that are in our comfort zone: creative, social media. I personally love writing. I love training. So on the flip side of this, where can we stretch? Where can we try some roles that push us outside of our comfort zone? So also chime in the chat box. What are some things that are outside your comfort zone that you'd be willing to give a try? So maybe that's advocacy. For me, fundraising would be outside of my comfort zone. What else would be outside of my comfort zone? Organizing. If I had to organize a protest or a march, that would definitely be outside of my comfort zone. I'd feel pretty nervous about that. Writing and strategy outside the comfort zone. Right, and we can see that related to our sort of natural levels of extroversion and our preferred ways of working, it impacts what roles we feel really comfortable taking on and what roles are a little bit of a stretch. Great, and as Francis mentions here, as you start working on it, it feels like less of a stretch. And I really bring this up because, one, in our work on climate, there's roles for everyone. You don't have to always be the head of the organization unit. You can do writing, you can do social media and other things that are more comfortable for you. I also bring this up because our innate styles and energy preferences aren't roadblocks, aren't boxes that we have to stay within. We can stretch beyond those. It may be uncomfortable at first, but as we work on it, we can continue to grow and take on other roles that we enjoy, even if they don't feel like they are a natural preference for us. So thank you. Thanks for everyone jumping in, advocacy and fundraising as well. So all of this comes in when you're thinking about what's in your comfort zone versus what's in your stretch zone, helps us think about how do we design our work as much as we can. I know we don't always have control over this, so that we have an energy balance. You know, and knowing all of this can help us create a bit more of a sustainable balance for us. And here are some questions you can consider as part of that. So that would be, what percentage of your time would you like to spend speaking versus writing? And regardless of what end of the spectrum you're on, you know, if you enjoy public speaking, do you want to do that all the time, or maybe only 80-60% of your time? If you're more reserved, are you willing to get into 20% speaking, or does that feel like too much? So these are just questions to ask yourself in terms of how you want to balance your energy. Same with how much independent work versus group-based work would you like to do? In group-based work, do you want to be in the leadership role or in more of a team member contributing role? And which project would you like to be the face of it, the lead? And which project would you like to be more behind the scenes? So I'm going to do a little bit of a side tangent on these next two slides, really to talk about networking, which already came up, and public speaking, which is the next slide. And I'm focusing on some tips and methods for how to handle these situations, because they tend to be, I would say they tend to be stretch for most people, and they are also kind of energy zapping for a lot of people. It means they take a lot of energy and they can be pretty nerve-wracking to do. So I do want to focus on these two, and I believe they did come up in some of the survey results as well, before we get into how to recharge from using our energy in a day. So networking. Networking, so you're at a conference, you're at a march, you're at a social mixer for work, and the goal there is to meet some people that you don't know and you haven't met before. Tips for how to deal with this so it's not so nerve-wracking. The first one is embrace the awkward. These kinds of mixers and social events are awkward for everyone. There are a few people who will know somebody there and they'll group together, but for most people, they don't know anyone there. And meeting someone you don't know like that can be kind of stressful. So I say just own it. You can come up to someone and say, I don't know anyone here, mind if I listen into your conversation? Or even, hey, these things are always awkward, mind chatting with me for a bit, just to break the ice. And once you've broken the ice, take time to just chat casually, make a connection like a normal person. Doesn't have to be overly business related. You're not trying to pitch anyone at this point. It's really just about making a human to human connection. I like to suggest starting with easy questions. I'll be honest, anytime there's an article on how to network, I read them. Lately, I've been seeing some, what I think is pretty bad advice of questions to lead in with. Questions like, what's your story? And those to me seem very, aggressive and ones that I would not want to respond to. So start easier. Have you been here before? What brings you here? These are questions people will automatically have an answer to. Do try to chat with different people throughout an event. And this can be hard to do, especially if we don't like this kind of activity, is we can feel like, okay, I overcame my barrier and I met someone. I broke the ice with someone. I don't want to have to do that again. But it is important to continue to meet other people. If you did hit it off with someone, recruit them. Say, hey, you and I, why don't we try to meet a third person? So you at least have a compadre in this. If it's appropriate, share contact details, and it's always good to somehow make a note, whether it's online in your phone or in a business card, to jot down where you met that person and one thing that really stood out, your conversation, or that you want to remember about them. We always think for sure we'll remember these people afterwards, but a lot happens and it's good to have that reference piece. Next, I want to go into public speaking. Public speaking is often nerve-wracking for really mostly anyone, and it can take a lot of energy. So when you are doing public speaking, some things to think about in preparation for this is write out your talking points. Not only does it help you focus, but I believe there are studies that show as you write down what you're going to say, it helps you actually remember and memorize what you're going to say. I'll share here. I have all my talking points for what we're talking about today here. Certainly, you know, good old practice, practice, practice. You'll hear that over and over again. My advice is know by heart, like have it memorized, how you'll start your speech or your presentation. The first 30 seconds to a minute is the worst. That is when your nerves are at its peak anxiety. So if you have that memorized, at least you have the confidence to know, I know how to start, and also trust you'll know how to complete how you start once you get going. I think they make similar suggestions for actors when they're doing that. Embrace the nerves. So in networking, embrace the awkward. For public speaking, embrace the nerves. And I want to touch on this a bit and spend some time here because I know a lot of people, a lot of friends and colleagues who have said to me, I don't like public speaking and I'm not good at it because I get so nervous before I do it. You know, I feel like I might vomit, or my hands are shaking, my voice is shaking. What are some of the other things? My heart is beating through the roof. So people have said this to me to say, this is why I don't do public speaking. I'm not made for it. But those physical reactions to something that is a bit daunting, like presenting, is natural. And it happens for everyone. It happened to me before this webinar started. It happens to me before every single public speaking activity I do. And we have to embrace that. When I start to feel my heart rate go up and my nerves kick in, I say, hello, hello nerves. I see you've joined the party. Thanks so much for being here. But I know that it doesn't have to stop me because it's a natural reaction. So don't let those things hold you back. Know that they happen. And as you do it more and more, you'll recognize those signs as they come up. Focus on how you're helping the audience. Our heads get into a space of saying, what if I don't do well? What if I make a mistake when I talk? What if people don't like what I say? So we can get into that stress. But if we instead say, I'm here to provide something to my audience, and I really want to ensure they get value out of it, ensure that they enjoy it and walk away with something, then suddenly we've shifted our focus on them and not on us. And that really can help reduce our stress. Stick with a style that's natural to you. If you like to add in humor, do it. If that's not your style, don't force it. And as you practice more and more, you'll get familiar with what your style is. Mine has definitely developed over time. It may depend on where you're doing your public speaking as well. You may need to be more formal at times and can be more casual at other times. So I touch on those two because they can be quite energy zapping. And as you do networking and public speaking, you'll also get a better understanding on how it affects your energy level. Maybe it's adding water to your glass, maybe it's taking water out of your glass. And understanding that helps you determine what kind of time you might need to recharge and rest after doing that. If you're on the more reserved side, you may need some more time after activities like that to recharge alone or with people you're very comfortable with. These can be activities like journaling, resting, hiking, meditation. If you're on the more outgoing side, your way of recharging may still be interactions with people. You may still need that social activity to add water to your glass. These can be events, things with friends, things with acquaintances, having adventures, and talking things out a bit more. I'll mention for myself, so I do fall on the more reserved side. When I do things like conferences, and I've had 3 days of social interactions in a row, I know that I need time after that really to be alone or to be, with people I'm very comfortable with for at least a day afterwards. And knowing that means I create my schedule to allow for that. So I try not to have 3 social days from a conference and then a whole nother public speaking thing after that. I know that I need to make sure to leave space so I recharge. Again, knowing our colleagues needs to. Some folks after a social event, after a conference or work event, may want to go to happy hour and have that social activity recharge. And some of our colleagues may not want to do that. So understanding everyone has their own needs, and it's not, they like us or not like us kind of thing. Now you may be saying, what? How can we afford to rest? How can we afford to take time to recharge? Don't you know there's a climate crisis happening out there? And yes, I am aware that these are urgent times and we have a lot of work to do. But we are also part of a movement, and especially all of you, you're part of a big movement, a global movement, and you're not alone in this. And by the fact that we are a bigger team, we can tag in and tag out as we need to make sure we're caring for ourselves and make sure we're supporting our colleagues when they need to care for themselves, so that we all get the rest and can continue to come back to this fight and this cause and this urgency with our full glasses, which is what we really need. Even someone like Cristiano Ronaldo takes a break every now and again. And yes, he might be the star of the team, but he's not the team within himself. They are able to survive without him and maybe possibly score a point or two in the meantime. So everyone takes a rest. And we can afford it, it is possible, and it's actually more than that, super, super healthy to do. So I'm going to take a step back here in the chat box. What are some ways that you've done to recharge? So whether you're reserved, outgoing, what are some things you like to do that helps you take a break from work, recharge your energy, and have some fun outside of work? I'd love to hear, I just listed a few things here, so I'd love to hear some of the things that you do. A walk in the woods. It's great. Play FIFA, nice. Is that actually playing football or a video game? Video games are fun too. Video game, nice. Yes, those are things that can take you into another world, and those are great hobbies and ways to recharge. Great. If anybody else has ideas for recharging, add them in here. We will also talk about this as the last section of today's lesson. Time in nature, great. We will talk about these, not the video game one I didn't have in the list, but I'll be sure to add it now. Oh, get on Twitter to have some fun. I don't think I've heard that one before. Interesting. We will talk about social media today as well. So that was the zoomed in approach. We are going to zoom out a little bit more and look at managing your energy on a larger scale. So coping with adversity and setbacks. And this is a graph. It's called the despair empowerment curve. This particular one I'm showing is designed for educators. So it can be really relevant for us and for our own energy, but also thinking about teams and the stakeholders we're working with. But overall, at the basic level, I really love this curve to describe some of the experiences we're having with our own thoughts and feelings and energy. So it's the thing at the bottom is called the valley of despair. And this can happen when we get information on the problem, we learn more about it, maybe we hear some news that wasn't so great, and it contributes to us falling into this valley or this pit of despair. And certainly we don't want to stay there. So coming out of that valley of despair often requires dealing with our feelings, embracing them, finding ways that we can overcome this, overcome some of the challenges we're facing, and eventually get to a place of empowerment where we once again feel that we can do something to affect change. So I want to talk about in the next few slides 4 scenarios I've seen in our work that tend to bring us into this valley of despair, and identify strategies and ways that we can bring ourselves out of it so we get more into the empowerment and motivation space. The first one is we can start to feel like the problem is just insurmountable. Yeah, and this happens to us probably nearly every day. We hear some news, some information, and something else that sounds like it's contributing to this bigger issue, and it starts to feel like maybe it's impossible. I've had this at times. I question, what's the point? Why am I doing this? Maybe it's too little, too late. Do we even have a chance? Right? And those are feelings that I'm probably not alone in having, and it can just start to feel overwhelming. How are we going to turn the tide on climate change, on conservation, on sustainability, on resource use? This can send us into the valley of despair. Part of overcoming this is really to both recognize those feelings, but also accept them and know that those feelings are okay. It's okay to ask the questions, is this worth it? Is it possible? It doesn't mean we have to give up and quit. There are probably no answers to those questions, but it's okay to feel those feelings because the work we're doing is really hard work. And it is natural to sometimes feel like it's insurmountable. Now, to overcome that, we can really remind ourselves of the progress being made. Things are happening. I'm seeing more movement now around climate than I have in my entire life. And with all those movements happening, all these, and your whole group, all these young folks getting engaged, we can start to get excited about the actual opportunities for change. More doors for change are opening now than they have ever opened before. Those create great opportunities. And then we can focus individually of our organizations, ourselves, our teams, and where we're able to make progress and change within those opportunities. And that's even more excitement. As well as we can start to look at those near-term achievements. What can we do within the next month, within the next 3 months, within the next year that will add up to a bigger impact? If we just focus on that long-term end goal, it might be maybe this overly ideal vision of how the Earth can be. It's going to feel like it keeps moving farther and farther and farther away, and we can never get there. But if we can focus on what we can achieve in the near term, we will see that progress. I've even had coaches give advice to me on writing down, they have like gratitude journals. You can do an achievement journal. This day, this week, I accomplished this to help you see the progress you're making. And this can pull us out of that valley of despair and feel a bit more empowerment to move forward. Now, the second thing that can put us into the pit of despair is dealing with project setbacks. This can be something didn't go as planned, a bill that we really wanted to get passed didn't get passed, legislators didn't vote for it, people didn't show up to an event we organized, and that, that's always hard. And sort of this sinking feeling of failure starts to come in. Now, to overcome that, we have to remember that failure is not an F word. Failure only comes from trying something. And that means you did something, you took action, and that in itself is a win. There's such a long history of inaction that failure only comes from trying something. And that deserves, a pat on the back at the very least to say, hey, we tried it, didn't work out, but at least we did something. At least we gave it a shot. And then from there, you can get specific on what didn't work well, but also what did work well. Because there's always elements of things that did work well, even in something that may have ultimately not worked out. And it's important to get into those details. So maybe people didn't show up to an event, but it was a great example of collaboration across 2 different teams. Great. How can we make sure we do that collaboration again? And then where are the areas we can improve to make sure more people show up to the event? Being able to get into those details is often a lot easier once you've set some clear goals and expectations at the start. So if you have a new project coming up, do think about what good looks like, and then you can measure what worked well and what didn't, without it all just being captured as a failure. Find the learning opportunities, document it. And a big piece of advice I want to give here is try to disentangle yourself from the work when evaluating what failed. And this can be hard to do because we are so passionate about the things we're working on that we feel that if an event failed, that means we are a failure. And that's not a true statement. Things fail, things don't work out for so many reasons. And it doesn't have to be a personal reflection on your abilities and skill, and likely is not a personal reflection on that. So try to remove yourself more objectively from what worked or didn't work so that you can evaluate it, learn from it, and move forward. But the great part, celebrate the wins, all of them, big, small. You tried something and you're learning from it. And that's something that is really, really important to take away from an event like this. Next up, you've encountered a skeptic. This is always fun, right? And in these situations, especially when we're talking about energy, it can be really energy sucking when you're encountering a situation like this. So in order to not have it send you into the valley of despair, and it can do that very, very quickly, these are some ways to either prevent that from happening or to pick yourself up from there. And I start with pick your battles. Determine if that engagement is worth your energy and time in the moment. And I will share, it's okay to not engage. If someone's not a believer, or someone doesn't agree with what you do and your effort, you can choose to not engage in that conversation. Similar to our movement, and do we have time to rest and recharge? Not every fight is the fight we have to take in that moment. You know, there's part of something bigger. So you can say no. If you're not in a space and an energy to have a discussion with someone who's a skeptic, you can just nod and walk away or change the topic. If you do want to engage, my suggestion is to start from a place of asking questions. Not hard questions like, how can you not believe this data? But questions of, well, what are you concerned about? You know, are there any natural resource concerns you have? What really matters to you? And use it almost as a qualitative research tool. Get to know who this audience is, who is the skeptic audience. And jumping to the bottom bullet point quickly, you can focus on some of those areas where there's likely to be shared values. Health. Are you concerned about air pollution? Are you concerned about water pollution? What are some things you think we can do to prevent that? What are some animals in the wild that you love? How can we protect them? So you can start from some of those places where even a skeptic will likely have a point of view that's very similar to your own. And I will say, you know, you can spend all your time on facts, information, and rational arguments. It's not going to work, and you'll find yourself just really frustrated. So it's really just not worth it for your energy. But instead, if you do choose to engage, try to engage in a place that finds common ground, and know that you're probably not going to win them over in that conversation. But the point is, can you get them to think about some things in a slightly different way? So the last category here of things that send us into the pit of despair and how we get out of them is managing negativity, especially online. So some folks mention that some things they like to do to recharge is to get on Twitter and have fun, or go on LinkedIn, and that's great. Sometimes those social media platforms are less positive for us and actually create a good bit of negativity. So how can we manage that? And I want to start with dealing with trolls. So this may happen on your own personal page. It's likely to happen more on any sort of group page or like business, I'm going to say business page that you might be responsible for managing or that you're putting posts on. And these typically would be posts around taking climate action and climate change. And I tend to think of trolls as being in one of three categories, from not so bad to worse. And I'm going to talk about each of these. So challenger comments are ones where someone's trying to play a devil's advocate or say, I disagree, and ask some really difficult questions. These are tough questions. They are trying to push you a bit, but they are still actually intelligent questions. So they're not trying to call you out or anything. When this happens, when a challenger comment is made, I recommend responding to it, especially since it is a smart question or a good point. And if we don't respond to it, it can look like we're avoiding the tough questions. And we don't want to be seen as avoiding that. So do respond, take the time you need to respond. It doesn't even have to be that same day. It's your call of the time you need to craft an appropriate response and then post. If that person who has an intelligent, challenging question then starts to get irate and angry and more conflict-oriented, then you can ask them to take it offline, just so you've removed that from the public-facing social media page. Say, looks like we need to discuss this further, I'll DM you, or PM you, whichever term you're using. The next type, combative comments. It's a little bit worse. So this leans more negative and is intending to call you out now. So it's trying to make you feel stupid or wrong or silly for what was shared. Now, in some cases, if that comment is, you can assume to most people, sounds like nonsense, then you can leave it up. It's going to look worse for the person that wrote it than it will look for you. And it doesn't warrant a reply. Sometimes you may say, this person has a tendency to write these kinds of comments. We've seen them before. So you can do a polite reply, something that says, I hear you, but also shuts it down so they don't continue. So something like, seems we view this differently. Well, I don't agree. I'm glad we can share this. Because sometimes people just want to feel heard online and they'll keep going until they get a reaction. So your reaction can be, glad you share this, don't agree, glad we can have disagreements here. And then it doesn't really allow for more back and forth. The final category, these are the worst ones, are really the ugly comments. These can be outright scathing, racist, offensive, or embarrassing comments that you don't even want associated with your post, with your name, with your page, or anything. They're that ugly. For those, you can go ahead and hide them. Almost every social media platform allows you to hide those kinds of comments. And typically the person who wrote that comment won't ever know that you hid them. Now, let's say that person does get angry and come back and keeps going and continues to do these ugly comments. Go ahead and block them. You don't owe them anything. You can block them from your page so they can't do that ever again. And same with the combative and the challenger. If those start to escalate and turn ugly, you can also hide or block those as well. So these are some ways of managing this negativity that may be directed right at you or the work you're doing on social media. Now, on the flip side of this, anytime you get positive comments or great questions, you should respond to those as well and reinforce that. So you're sending a signal of, these are the kinds of things we want to see on here. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for your question. Great comment. So glad you contributed. All of those things will reinforce the kinds of behaviors you're looking for and hopefully push out the more combative, ugly comments. And something to remember, because the internet can really suck us into a place of anger and negativity and sometimes rage. And it's other people's anger and rage that then becomes ours. And it's really easy to get absorbed into that. Something we have to remember is the data behind this. Most tweets are only coming from 10% of people on Twitter. 10%. That's very small. If you go outside into the world around you, those conversations aren't happening the way they are happening on Twitter. So you can put it into some perspective and say, well, this may be what's happening in Twitter or on Instagram or somewhere else, but it doesn't reflect the real world, including the fact that 9 to 15% of those folks commenting are robots, aren't even real people. So this helps just keep it a bit more in perspective. And when we start to feel like we're absorbing the rage or the anger from social media, we can say, this is not really how it is when I interact with people in the real world. You also have every right to curate your own social media experience. You can mute, unfollow, unfriend, or block accounts that are triggering for you. And on Twitter, you even have the ability to turn off retweets. So there might be someone that you really enjoyed their tweets, but they're retweeting things from people that you are not interested in seeing, and you can turn off those retweets only on a per account basis, so it's a little bit of work. You are allowed to unfollow or mute or unfriend things that don't feel good to you. And I know sometimes we have a hard time doing this because we feel like we're choosing ignorance over being informed. But the challenge with social media is that it doesn't give us an opportunity to opt in when we're ready to engage in these topics or some of these difficult conversations, and it forces it on us. So we can change that dynamic and say, I want to be able to opt in when I choose and when I'm ready and when I'm interested, and have that control. Go ahead and add accounts that bring you levity and joy. There's a great account on Twitter called We Rate Dogs, and it's all about the cutest dogs everywhere. That's a fun one. Add those to your account. Have some moments where you can take a break and laugh and recharge. And on your own social media feeds, don't feel pressure to share if you don't want to. And remember that it all leans towards showing the best parts of life, not the worst parts and not even the in-between kind of boring parts. And I struggle with this. I'll definitely start to compare my life with others, and that can make me feel kind of down. So I have to remember, this isn't their everyday life. Right now, they're probably sitting on the couch just like I am. So those are four things that can happen that send us into a pit of despair and ways to get out of it. In the chat box, before we hit the final section, what are some ways that you have used to overcome setbacks and adversity that help you recharge? I know we just covered a lot, so anything you can share on ways that you overcome some of these real, more negative moments, I think would be helpful for the group to hear, besides what I shared. So switching off from social media completely for a couple of days. That's great. Social media detox is becoming increasingly popular to just put it away so you can have a break from all of that. That's really important. Has anyone ever had a project setback or, quote unquote failure that you were able to recover from? Joseph, how did you recover from a failure or a setback? I'm going to give Joseph some time. I know typing in is sort of a pain in the arse. But do, continue to share. We'll continue to look at these throughout the next few slides. And this whole next section is about recharging. Oh, Joseph, thank you. Oh, so you had a learning moment. So the failure possibly came from not involving all group members. So yes, it didn't work, but now you know what to do in the future. Those are the exciting aspects of something that might feel kind of crappy. And it may take us some time to get to that positive place. That's okay too. But having that ability to really say, what didn't work as well as it could have here, and how can I do it differently, really helps us from saying, it failed, I failed, what's the point? So thank you for sharing that, Joseph. So sustaining our energy for the long road ahead. This is that zoomed out mode, and mostly we're going to talk about resilience. So the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties, things like we just covered, adversity, setbacks, negativity. So this idea of valley of despair happens over and over and over again. It's not just going to happen once. We don't just come out of it once. It happens over and over and over again. Now, our goal is to have some fewer extremes, even fewer extremes at the height level, because sometimes that might indicate we are overstimulated and not quite as grounded as we need to be. So fewer extremes on both levels. We want to have more shallow valleys. That means that despair doesn't go as low. We want to have slower dips into those valleys. So it's not sort of a crash into despair, but you see yourself creeping there, and you can start to bring in some resilience activities to prevent it from happening or to make it even more shallow. And then we want faster recoveries when we do hit that pit of despair. It's going to happen. I don't think we can ever avoid it from happening, but how can it happen more slowly, less extreme, and then we can come out of it faster? That's part of the goal of building up like a resilience regimen that we can continue to practice and incorporate into our life. A book I really recommend on this topic is called Rest. Well titled, right? And a quote from the author is, "Rest is not work's adversary. Rest is work's partner. They complement and complete each other." And I love this because so often we think rest means I'm not working and I should be working. But rest is part of taking care of ourselves and actually bringing some of our best productivity and ideas to the table and creativity to the table. And there's different kinds of rest. Active rest, which is, more physical. You're taking a walk, you're meditating, you're hiking. Mental rest, taking a break from work. Maybe that is, playing a video game or doing a hobby. Physical rest is the one we know most, which is naps and sleep. And incorporating all of these into your schedule as part of your balance is really, really important. This book is not difficult to read. It's fairly quick. I actually discovered that like the last third of it are all references, so it's even shorter than you think it is. And it talks about how some of the greatest minds in our history that brought innovation and creativity, how they incorporated rest into their life. And that brings the bullet here. What are the opportunities to organize our work around our times of highest productivity? And then how can we incorporate rest during times where we're likely to be less productive? So instead of just, we hit those moments where we're less productive, let's say after lunch. Instead of just keeping pushing ourselves and pushing ourselves, oh, I got to get this done, I have to plow through it. Can we take a 10-minute walk and kind of recharge from that and come back, and then you can do that work much better. This book also makes a case for establishing a morning routine. Personally, this is something I've not yet mastered and I'm not that great at, but it does talk about how that's an important factor of waking up and starting your day. So maybe you all are better at that than I am. Getting social, no matter where you are on that extroversion spectrum, we are still a social species, we're still a herd species, and having some social activity is really important to building up that resilience. Maybe that's 1 or 2 close friends, a big social group, maybe it's alone time, I'm going to call that getting social as well. And an interesting, some new studies coming up on casual low stakes friendships and the importance of that. These are neighbors, someone at your coffee shop, someone in one of your exercise classes that you probably don't see and hang out with outside of those moments, but you always say hello to, you recognize, you have small chat. That's actually been shown to be really valuable in our sense of belonging, our sense of community, and as a way to recharge our own happiness. So, value those. We feel like, oh, this is just a person who gives me their coffee every day and I say hello to you, they're great. But that interaction adds a lot of value to your daily energy for everyone, even those on the reserve side. Take up a hobby. We've talked about this a little bit, but having a hobby or multiple hobbies helps you take a break from work, helps you force to put work aside for a bit and recharge. You can spend time on other topics as active rest and mental rest. It helps foster creativity. You can start to connect different ideas in different ways. It's a healthy distraction. It's great for skills and making some of those social connections, including some of those casual relationships. I'll add to this, I try hobbies all the time. Some of them stick around, some of them don't. I've found that even getting extremely frustrated with a hobby is a healthy distraction for me. At least I'm not getting frustrated with something at work. Instead, I'm frustrated because I don't draw very well and I'm trying to draw. So things like that is actually still really healthy. Earlier, a few people brought up being out in nature and taking a walk as a way of recharging and resilience. And that increasingly is known as a way to fill our cups and give back to us. And this is from a book that, truth be told, I haven't read, but it's called Forest Bathing, which is the newest trend about being out in nature. And I want to read these instructions to you on how to do it. I find them peaceful in itself, these instructions. Make sure you have left your phone and camera behind. You are going to be walking aimlessly and slowly. You don't need any devices. Let your body be your guide. Listen to where it wants to take you. Follow your nose and take your time. It doesn't matter if you don't get anywhere. You are not going anywhere. You are savoring the sounds, smells, and sights of nature and letting the forest in. Man, doesn't that sound good? So whatever kind of nature is around you, even in urban settings, taking some time to get out into nature is really, really helpful in building those resilience practices. Be kind to yourself. I don't think we do this enough. Just be kind, be good to yourself. Give yourself some of those guilty pleasures in a guilt-free way. Your cheesy TV shows, your romantic comedy movies, murder mysteries, music. Pay yourself a compliment. Compliments are really helpful. They release those endorphins for us. And sometimes we rely on social media for that. We don't always get compliments from others when we need them, but there's always someone around who can pay you a compliment, and that's yourself. And don't be shy to do it. Go ahead and say, you know what, Brooke, you did a great job today. It feels good. So go ahead and pay yourself a compliment and pamper yourself as you need. It's all about the self-care. And certainly there's many tried and true approaches: exercise, journaling, yoga, meditation, cultural events. And I do really want to make a plug for if you work for an employer and you have a set number of vacation days, take all of them. Those are your days. It's your right to take them. And we can feel like it's not possible, there's too much going on. Remember, even Cristiano Ronaldo takes a break every now and again, so can you. In my best years, I planned out my vacation days in advance at the start of the year. If I had 3 weeks off, I knew that every fourth month I was going to take a week off, and I put it in the time off system. Even if I had no idea where I was going to go, even if I didn't go anywhere, I made sure to have it in the calendar to force myself to take those days off. It's super, super important, and that's why employers give us days off. So to close this out, and we'll have time for questions and any other additional activities that I didn't mention that you really value for recharging, I'd love to hear those in the chat box as well. So in summary, the work that we're doing is not easy. It's not an easy journey. We choose to do this work because it's important to us and it's fulfilling, and we feel really passionately about it. So much so that it's common to give so much, and even times maybe too much, of ourself to the mission that in the end we forget to take care of ourselves. And we can sustain our involvement, our engagement, our achievements by knowing our engagement preferences, our styles, and our energy sources, designing a balance that works for us and that still pushes us into stretched zones, adding in recovery time, be sure to do that, developing tools and methods for dealing with the negativity, the adversity, the setbacks, so it doesn't keep us into a valley of despair, and creating a resiliency program that steadies our energy for the long haul so we can continue to come back to this work that we care so much about. So I want to thank you all for joining me today, joining me this morning my time. It may not be morning your time. If you have any questions about this, anything that you want to share with me or discuss, please feel free to email me. I'm brooke@brooketully.com. You can check out my website. It's mainly information on motivating behavior change for conservation, not so much on building resiliency, although I do have some blogs on this topic. So feel free to check out my site, but it won't be so much on this topic. And I'd love to hear any questions that anybody has about this, or anything that you would like to share on your own experiences. And I believe questions are also in the chat box. I don't think there's a separate question space. And you are also free to come on a microphone or video to ask your question as well. Hopefully there won't be any connectivity issues.
If anyone's new to Zoom and is trying to ask a question by talking, you have to go to the bottom left of your screen, whether you're on a desktop or your phone, and there's a little microphone icon which you press to unmute yourself. Everyone was muted automatically when they joined because it's a presentation from Brooke, but you can unmute yourself to speak. But otherwise, do just throw your question in the chat. I was just going to say, oh, someone has, there's some comments coming in, but while we're waiting for any questions, I'll just say a huge thank you to Brooke for what's really, really important thought process for us all to be having. And I think one of the things that we can all do, which was kind of touched on at various points in Brooke's presentation, is just look out for each other. And it's partly, I think that's just being honest about the stress that we're under. Because I think if everyone pretends to be a superhero and that they're, you know, doing amazing things and not getting tired and, you know, finding it easy and ready for the next challenge all the time, you know, there's that kind of sense that people who are struggling feel that they're the only one. So I think being honest about the struggles you're having in your own networks, but even more publicly than that on social media, is actually really positive, and it helps a very healthy debate and discussion about that in the wider network. And I think encourages people who feel like, you know, they've got huge admiration for what a lot of young activists are doing, and they just think they don't have it in them. And I think it encourages them to join the movement if they can see that actually, you know, people are encountering those challenges, but just together getting through them, rather than there's some superheroes that I really admire, but I can never be like them.
Yeah, thank you for that, Matt. And I think that's part of social media as well, or the public facing, is that we can assume that because someone, I'm going to use Greta for an example, and I don't know Greta personally at all, but because she's in front of a camera so often in the screen, that she's comfortable doing that, that is natural for her, and I could never do that. But we don't know what practices she's putting in place that allows her to do that. It may not be comfortable for her, but she's decided she's going to do it anyway. And not everyone has to make that level of commitment. You can say, my role is going to be writing the blogs about this, and I'd rather do it behind my computer. And that's super valuable. We need all of those roles. So we can't always assume that someone playing a forward-facing role is doing it naturally, totally comfortably without stretch. And we also can't assume that those are the only roles out there. I did see a question from Francis. So can you talk a little about someone with both personalities and how we can balance it? Yes, I will try, and actually speaking from myself a bit. Overall, all of these things come down to your personal energy and your personal needs. So I really wanted to share some frameworks and some broad level ideas to say, that's all great and well and good. What does it mean to me individually and personally? So that is something to consider. If you have some bits of both sides of reserved, energetic, and some sides of solitary, energetic and outgoing and reserved and solitary, is as you're doing different roles, maybe one role you have is doing a lot of writing, maybe you're in a lot of meetings, still take the time to evaluate what seems to be taking the most energy away from you and what seems to be adding the most energy to you. And spend maybe after each of those events in a day, you can say, did that add to my cup? Did it take from my cup? Because all of those things are going to be different for you individually. And you can start to design a balance for yourself from there. So it likely will come down to trying different things and practicing and seeing how it feels, and then being able to design a program for yourself. So I hope that's helpful, Francis. Are there other questions? I appreciate the nice comments here from Ibrahim and Bijou. Thank you. Well, Matt, I'm not sure I see more questions coming in.
Yep, no, I think that's drawn to a close, which is great. So obviously, if anyone does have any more questions, there are still forums to send them in. Brooke will be running this webinar again this evening. And if you do have any sort of burning questions that you want to either raise in a forum or with Brooke directly, then send it to youthforourplanet@gmail.com so we can forward it. Actually, I think someone has unmuted themselves. If someone was trying to give a question. Unfortunately, the quality of the sound isn't coming through very well. Yeah, I'm going to mute that one because I don't think we can hear the words. So if that was you and you do still have a question, if you're quick, please pop it into the chat so that Brooke can respond. But otherwise, yeah, as I was saying, do feel free to sort of open up discussions in the WhatsApp groups with each other and with others who have experience in different areas. And if you've got anything specifically for Brooke, send it to youthforourplanet@gmail.com. Or I think actually, Brooke, did you share your?
I did.
I'm not going to ask you to if you don't. Yeah, there we are. I thought you did. So Brooke's very generously put her email address on there if it's something which is so specific that you don't think it would be valuable for everyone to get the response. And we will be putting the best recording, so either this one or the one from later, up on the website for future reference and for those who couldn't make it to either of the times. And we, as we have done with the other ones, will include the slides as a download alongside that anyway, because I know there's so much good stuff in here that you can't note it all down or absorb it all when it's live. So it just remains to say a huge thank you to Brooke for another fab webinar. And any closing remarks, Brooke, or are you done?
Well, I'll just say, and thank you all, and good luck on beginning to bring these tools and techniques and practices into your daily, weekly, and yearly life. I will just mention it is an ongoing practice and an ongoing journey, and sometimes we're really good at it, and sometimes we need a reminder to be good at it. So don't be too hard on yourself if sometimes you're better at recharging and sometimes you let it slip. It is an ongoing journey and an ongoing practice to do so.
Fantastic, thank you. So thanks everyone, we'll close this now. And just a reminder, please do let people know about these webinars. They're free for the young people involved in Youth for Our Planet. It's a great opportunity. So yeah, just let people know in case they haven't realized that they're for them, or how easy they are to join. And we'll try and ensure that as many as possible make the most out of this fantastic content we're gathering. So thanks again, and we'll see you for the next one.
Okay. Bye, everyone. Thank you, Matt.
Cheers. Bye-bye.